the Program Manager of Disaster Legal Help Victoria, which is a partnership public-private partnership across the whole legal sector of Victoria, responding to the disaster legal needs of Victorians. There is no such thing as a natural disaster. So disasters we make the decisions around how disasters occur. So nature itself doesn't cause disasters. So our legal, economic, political and social decisions all determine the impacts of disasters afterwards. Of gender, and also inequality is also similar. It's all the decisions that we make around how we organise our lives and how we live together that inform and, you know, the outcomes in a disaster. It changes that. So you'll have differentiated impacts upon somebody who's in a caring role or different genders in relation to the disaster itself. So I see the three as kind of like weaving in together: disaster justice, climate justice, gender justice. And we do have an obligation to look at all of these things through an intersectional lens. So there's also race in there, like all of these different ways that disasters change an equitable outcome in disasters. I think if gender equity is central to a disaster response at all stages, it's about making the invisible more visible and recognising the disproportionate burden of care that predominantly women do throughout all the stages of disaster. And so the research is super important to understand that, the lived experience of women and sharing that and amplifying that, but also importantly is having a recognition within our laws and how they play out, but also our policies and how we organise and understand community resilience, is bringing care to be central to all of these policies and approaches, from the very small acts that we do within our organisations with each other, how we relate with community, in our families, on the street, but also at the higher level. Because recognising care as an important principle of leadership also means that that women become recognised and those doing care work become recognised, and it's not as invisible anymore and can be protected. I think the greatest impact that we could have if we want to shift the scales in terms of gender justice, disaster and climate justice would be to recognise the invisible work that women do at all stages of disasters. It also means elevating the importance of relationships and the informal economies and informal systems of care that we have. And I want to go back to the notion of understanding disasters as when our systems fail us. And so recognising when our big systems fail us, like communications, like disaster response, like all of that, when those big systems and policies fails, what is it that comes in and protects us and looks after us? And the majority of that is a gendered form of labour. So I think that's one of the most important things that we could do in disaster response, is start to recognise that, and not just recognise it, but nurture it as a strength that we should all be doing in the way that we approach disasters and everyday life, really. Disasters expose how we haven't yet thought through, or we haven't yet, as a society, but also in our laws, we're not legally prepared. The legal system is not prepared for disasters, so which means there's a gap in access to justice. There is a presumption behind laws of stable weather, and we're heading into climate change where the weather is strange, and we're seeing that. And we also have a system of law where everything's quite siloed, and different areas of law are siloed. And the access to justice question in disasters, your whole life can go down, and you will be dealing across like so many different jurisdictions, so many different areas of law, that the whole thing becomes overwhelming and the second trauma, I would say, in relation to the impacts of the disaster. So access to justice asks questions of the law, and it needs to get its act together in it to be able to respond coherently and caringly with communities at this particular traumatic time in their lives. It's such a mess. Like insurance over here, tenancy over there, planning over there, disaster payments here, Centrelink, federal, state, local, like it's just, it's quite incoherent. The biggest barriers for women trying to seek legal help after a disaster is even knowing that they have a legal problem to begin with, and even knowing that that legal problem is related to the disaster. There's also a lot of barriers that we're coming to understand more in the law, such as their access to entitlements and whether it's with their partner. So the use of financial instruments, the weaponising of financial instruments like insurance, like home ownership. When there is a disaster, that puts pressure on already unequal relationships and enables these instruments to be weaponised and create further inequality. So that one of the barriers is the legal system coming to understand that a lot more and starting to put in place policies that can protect against the abuse of these insurance policies, whether you've got your name on them or not. Also, the barrier is that women, that caregiver role again, everybody's under stress, you're looking after children, you put yourself last, it's a high time of stress within the family unit, within the community, and so your caregiver role may go uber to the point of not looking at the notion of rights and your own rights, but also being very short-term, like trauma makes you short-term thinking. And so you're making a lot of decisions that may affect your long-term outcomes. So having a trauma-informed gender approach really early in disasters is really important to not exacerbate what pre-exists, and we don't want to continue inequality, really. I think that the climate disasters and climate impacts challenge the justice/legal system in many ways. One of the first is that, and one of the primary ones, it's a system that just ignores the weather, and the weather is not taken into account that much as a pressurising force on lots of our legal areas. So we have the presumption of stable environments that all our laws are based on. So how can it do better is start to take climate change into account, but not just climate change, but also the differential impacts that climate change will have in our social contract with each other and on our society, and therefore through the legal system is one thing that can help ameliorate that and ensure that there is equality. So this kind of requires a wholesale rethinking of how our legal system responds and our laws, all our little policies and regulations respond to climate justice and not just climate change. And gender and that's also including gender in that, is a super important part of that. So it's a review of everything, and it also requires our laws to be adaptive, because in disasters and in climate change, things can alter pretty quickly. Circumstances can change. You can move from an equal situation to inequality super quickly. So we need to also have adaptive laws that can respond to the real conditions on the ground.